But to do the job really well, you need time. And it's hard, and to do marketing really well, you need time. So to try and do both effectively results in what happens to our industry, where you have someone up at 2 a.m. on Canva posting on Instagram because that's the only time they have available during the day. Any good salesperson in any industry, in any discipline, is they're really good at building out a network of potential customers. And that is very time consuming. You know, you need time to like invest in spending it with people, sitting down with people, connecting with people, learning what they're looking for, finding out their needs. You know, people look at a lot of how real estate prices have exploded. A lot of that has to do with the fact that now the buying agents, you know, are coming from all over the place. It's once it really truly was opened up to kind of a free market where you can have people come in from wherever, you can have people bid up houses. That's when the prices really, and if you track back, look at when the internet comes in and people start, you know, getting away from the old system where you'd use a local expert. But that is like the moment, if you track the data, that's when you start to see it climb and climb and climb until what we're dealing with now.
Why don't we start with maybe a little introduction of you? Like, what is who you are? What are you specialized in real estate? And maybe you're a little bit here.
Yeah, definitely. So my name's Duncan Harvey. We are in our Berkshire Hathaway Home Services office here. I've been doing real estate now just over 10 years. Originally was at RE/MAX About Town, which at the time was the only RE/MAX office that was allowed to be in Oakville. Born and raised in Oakville, and I'd come from like a sales background prior to doing real estate. I also was really involved with coaching hockey. I'd coached my brother for years with my dad. And then when my brother finished playing, we took another age group. So that left me with a really large, useless network in town. But when I got into real estate, it turned out to be like a good thing. We came over here just over 2.5 years ago. The advantage of being at RE/MAX About Town was the time we were there, we had the number 1 and the number 2 team in Canada for RE/MAX were in our office. And so, you know, coming out of the hockey world, I'd always been interested with like, you know, building teams and like the organizational structure. And I coached at like the AAA level, so like all the guys were trying to get into like, you know, play OHL or NCAA and kind of learning about all that. And then when I was kind of done with those guys, I was also the general manager of the Oakville Blades as well. So I had an opportunity to work with an ownership group that had bought the team. We had to like basically strip it down, rebuild the whole team, build out all the staff, like kind of rebuild the whole thing. So I'd always had an interest in doing that. But when I got out of the hockey world, and I got into real estate, I spent the first number of years just selling and like learning how to sell and everything else. Andrew McCreary, who's my business partner, he and I have known each other since like grade school. We grew up together, just like not actually that far from our office. And I was about a year and a bit into it. And then Andrew has a different background. He did, you know, he went to Western, did the Ivy program, did a CA, was at KPMG working as an accountant. Got out of it, didn't enjoy that aspect of work, so he got out of it and we worked together. So it was a good team because I had kind of like that sales marketing background. He came at it from really like analytical sense. We both had really large networks, a lot of which overlapped, hence why we worked together. But we were young, we were around 30 when we started. So we started at the right time. We started to, as the industry was really like shifting as well. And kind of in the research that we did, like, you know, real estate has seen some like huge like turning points. So the last big shift would have been the introduction of the internet. And that drastically changed the brokerage model because what it allowed for was, you know, previous to that, when everything was paper-based, you know, if you had a brokerage and you had 50 desks, you'd have 50 agents. The agents would have to come in every day and they'd have that big, which I never had to deal with, thank God, but that big book they would all carry.
Right. And all the listings were there.
All the listings. And I know a colleague of ours who's been on your show, Michael, like he worked back in the 80s when that's how that worked. But what the brokerages realized at that point, and that's where we saw the shift, is they became effectively like gyms, like that model. So it's like Good Life. Almost anyone you know in your friend group, half of them probably have a Good Life membership, and most of them will say, like, I have this amazing deal. I'm a this, I'm a that, I got this great Good Life, it's $10 a month or whatever. They haven't gone to Good Life in years, right, but it's such a good price. So the brokerage model shifted to, well, now you can, instead of having 50 agents because you have 50 desks, now you can have, you know, 1,500 agents, and throw them a Christmas party and offer some training and everything else, but you can, get those monthly fees and get a split off of them and off you go kind of thing. And then you saw like the explosion of like the truly discount brokerages, your right at homes, your home life, like the brokerages that, we're even more extreme at like, we're just not going to offer anything to our agents unless it's an absolute emergency, but we're the cheapest thing in town. And if someone's trying to operate a business, it keeps their overhead very low and everything. So that's where as we came into the industry, we were part of the next shift. And the next shift was what we've kind of, looked at as like the death of the local agent. So when we first started, I remember when, we're in Oakville here. We were at Remax About Town. We're in Old Oakville right now. And I remember there were agents in my office that worked Old Oakville, and they would refer business to Glen Abbey, which is just on the other side of the highway.
Okay.
Because they're like, I don't understand that neighborhood, and I'm not competent enough to sell a house or have a buyer in that pocket, but I'll refer it to an agent in my office who understands that pocket. They would take a referral fee. Again, pre-internet, the license was always good for the province, but the way the boards worked, like if I was an Oakville agent, I couldn't work in Burlington because I wasn't a member of the board. And so I would refer my Burlington business to an agent and an agent. So like there was a whole business model, which most of the agents back then followed, where you would have alliances all over the city. And as your clients moved around in different pockets, again, the internet comes in, information starts to get passed around. The concept of what the boards used to do disappears. You start seeing Toronto agents come out to Oakville, Burlington. That property is listed only on TREB. They're not even members of the brokerage out here. OMDREB, like the Oakville board in town here, I think it's something like there's only about, I don't know what the recent numbers are, but I remember a couple of years ago it was like 60% of the actual listings in town are on the Oakville board. There's 40% of listings that aren't even on the board, they're on the Toronto board. Obviously the industry's gone through a shift with like the ITSO kind of board, and then obviously the Toronto board. We were young enough when we started, we just thought this is completely ridiculous. This is a bunch of old school thinking. Why is there just not one Ontario board?
Right.
Why are we not spending all of these fees investing into technology to allow for a better experience for our clients? We should learn what happened in the US. They're always like 5 to 7 years ahead of us. They didn't. That opened the door for Zillow to come in. They had rules down there passed that everything became public. Zillow basically walks in the front door and completely upends the whole industry by just building a really good website that Realtor.com could have been had the agents work together and abolish these old boards. So for us, we saw that as we started our business, and Andrew and I basically went where the business was. Like again, coming from sales, my old boss used to say like lowest hanging fruit. So I lived in Oakville, Andrew lived in Toronto. If I had someone that wanted to rent a condo in Toronto, I was in Toronto. That's one of my first deals. I had a good friend of mine referred me his brother, but he wanted to buy a house in Hamilton. Well, I helped him buy a house in Hamilton. And if you talk to agents today, that's how everyone does their business.
Right.
They are, they might live in Toronto, but they do deals in Oakville, Burlington, Mississauga. They'll go out to Pickering, like they'll go everywhere. And and again, logically, it makes a lot of sense. When these houses were a few $100,000, and you're talking about like $1,500 worth of commission, and you're in Scarborough, and your client wants to buy a house in Burlington, you're probably going to refer that out, and you'll take your 25% and hand it to a local agent. Well, now if that same person's buying a $2 million house in Burlington, you're looking at $40,000 to $50,000 of commission. You're probably going to drive from Scarborough to Burlington to help your client. So we found starting in the industry without any of the biases, it was like a real opportunity to really get listings, because we were like, okay, now our job is to actually provide a lot of information, not only to the potential buyers, but also the potential buyer agents, because it's very conceivable that this buyer's agent's only time they've ever been to Oakville is with this particular client. And they know nothing about the schools. They know nothing about what's in the area. Depending on how they came in off the highway, they're like, oh, this isn't a nice part of town. Where it actually was, it's just they just picked the one way in.
Right.
That So we saw a real opportunity there. And I remember in our office, there was a lot of like okay, like sure, new guys, like okay. And then one of the first things we really saw a shift in 2015 was like kind of the birth of the Chinese buyers that kind of came out of nowhere. And one of the things that we always tracked is the percentage in a pocket of buyers agents that are out of town agents. And we went back for years. Again, Andrew's a data guy, so he liked building spreadsheets and everything else. But what we noticed was like this trend of, 30%, 40, 50, all of a sudden now when we started in 2015, 80 to 85% in a pocket in Oakville, and pretty much every pocket in Oakville, the buying agent was an out-of-town agent. People look at a lot of how real estate prices have exploded. A lot of that has to do with the fact that now the buying agents, are coming from all over the place. And what I mean, like with a local agent in any neighborhood you grew up in, right? You think like, you remember where you grew up, right? And you would know that street over there, that's the nice street.
Exactly.
Right? But the street right beside it, well, that's not as nice as that street.
Yeah, you don't want to be in that corner past 10.
Exactly. Right? But none of that matters now, because if 80 to 85% of the buyer agents, they're just going to look on Treb and they're going to be like, well, that is in the blah, blah, blah region. And actually the best example would be like Southeast Oakville, which is the most expensive pocket in town. In the Oakville board, it is divided into, you have Old Oakville where we are right now, you have the Morrison pocket, which are the very large custom homes, and then beside it is called the Ford pocket. So these are homes like built in the 70s, like 2-story, single detached, very nice. But those are 3 separate pockets. Morrison and Old Oakville are the really high price points, in particular Morrison, because those are all like 100, 200 wide by 100 to 300 foot lots. So that's where you're going to see those massive houses all custom built. The Ford pocket, on the other hand, is all smaller, 70s builds, 80s builds. On the Toronto board, Morrison and Ford are one pocket, and it's called Eastlake. So when the Chinese buyers show up in 2015, they are very similar to how Americans buy homes, where they're very focused on square footage of the home, schools and everything else. Well, Oakville Trafalgar, which is the school for Southeast Oakville, used to be downtown Oakville, close to where we are now. And then about 20 plus years ago, actually longer than that, probably 30 plus years ago, they moved it into the Ford pocket. So now you've got these new people that are new to Oakville. You've got agents that are new to the area, and they just all of a sudden see, hey, there's a bunch of homes over here that are way cheaper than these ones right beside it, but it's the same schools, and you saw this enormous jump. And then the other thing we saw is, in Oakville, Burlington, out this way, local people, they all know what the good schools are, right? Most people do. You grow up in a community, especially if you've been there a long time, you're like, oh, that's a good school, whatever. There's that school rank, I think it's Fraser Institute ranks the schools. Mm-hmm. We have newcomers to the community, they're going off of that. So in 2016, the school in Glen Abbey, Abbey Park, was ranked the best high school in Oakville. Typically it was Oakville Trafalgar, but for whatever reason, and I went to Oakville Trafalgar, so obviously a little biased, but Abbey Park becomes the #1 high school according to this list. Glen Abbey doubles in price. So we're looking at this going, wow, this is a lot different than the power is who has the buyers. So, and wherever these people are coming from, however they take in information, however they learn, that's what we need to learn. Not the bias of well, I grew up here and I know everything about this community and you're not gonna tell me, because that's just not how it is, right? That kind of bias and local agent mindset that basically kept, one of the things that gets talked about a lot is, real estate's unaffordable and everything else. Frankly, and people hate real estate agents, the old school real estate agents actually did a great job at keeping the pricing down. It's once it really truly was opened up to kind of a free market where you can have people come in from wherever, you can have people bid up houses, that's when the prices really, and if you track back, look at when the internet comes in and people start getting away from the old system where you'd use a local expert and you start using these regions. Hey, I got a friend who's an agent. That's how people pick an agent. My best friend's an agent. And use that guy. We both grew up in Mississauga. We live in Toronto now and he wants to buy a house in Burlington. Yeah, I can help him do that. Right? That never would have happened before. But that is the moment, if you track the data, that's when you start to see it climb and climb and climb until what we're dealing with now. So that very long-winded story, is where we saw the opportunity for what we're trying to build. Because again, back in the day, if you were a local agent, like how real estate used to be, is like if we're in Old Oakville. So I live in Old Oakville, I pick a brokerage in Old Oakville, my client base is Old Oakville. So think about what your day would look like. You come into the office, you pop over to see, do some showings, you maybe have a listing coming up, you pop over to see your seller. How much are you in the car? Not long, you're 5-10 minute trips. Right. Now think of what typical realtor's day. They live in, we have agents they work out of this brokerage, but they live in Toronto. They have clients buying in Hamilton, in a given day. I've done that. I've shown properties in Toronto, Oakville, Burlington, Hamilton, all in the same day to 4 different sets of clients. Think of how much time I'm now driving, and when am I doing all those other little jobs that are becoming part of being a real estate agent. And not even talking about social media, because that's a whole other conversation as to how time consuming that can be. But just think of when am I doing paperwork? When am I catching up on emails? When am I doing these things? Sure, I can make phone calls in the car, and most realtors, that's when you kind of do your touch base calls. But what if there's action steps off that call? Hey, great talking with Alex, and I'll send you those properties of blah, 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 whatever we talked about. When am I gonna do that? I can't. I'm driving on the 401, racing across the city to try to meet another client to do a showing. So if you look at the internet coming in and the erosion of the brokerage services, a new opportunity starts to transform itself. And that is the birth of the mega team. So if you look at any market in Ontario and frankly Canada and honestly North America, every single pocket is dominated by these mega teams. So if you sell a house in Waterdown, the Wolcott team is an unbelievable team, great agents, but mega team. If you're in close to Toronto, Mississauga, you've probably heard of Sam McDaddy. He does a lot of advertising, mega team, right? In Oakville here, we've got a ton of them. We've got the Christopher and Vidiata team, they've been around a long time. Alex Irish, the Goodale Miller team, Sam McDaddy trades here, and then you've got the Loretta Finney, and her kids have taken over her team. They were Lauren Park, they do a lot in Oakville now. There's a lot of big teams out here. Scott Benson's another big team. And that became the opportunity, is what these brokerages, through the erosion of services, it opened the door for people to build up their own infrastructure. Again, Hamilton, Rob Golfey's he's a big team, right? So you can go to any market and you're gonna find these mega teams. And all they've done is effectively go back to what brokerages used to offer their agents, which was a high level of service, and they let their salespeople be salespeople. So when we were really happy with Remax, and we have nothing but positive things to say, and we were actually planning on staying there and working with our old brokerage on something. And then an opportunity came with Berkshire Hathaway, that Berkshire Hathaway in the US now is the largest brokerage in the US, and it's obviously an amazing company with Warren Buffett and all that kind of stuff. We felt it was a really cool brand because obviously they're American, but Warren Buffett is, we kind of call him Canadian wealthy, he's a humble guy.
Right.
He's not flashy, he's not, and we felt in Oakville, Burlington, that would be a good brand to represent. And so we kind of pitched them on, hey, we have this idea, which effectively isn't anything other than we feel is the next evolution. So if you look at Manhattan in New York, Manhattan in particular is a very unique real estate market. Now, most people think of it because it's very expensive. What most people don't realize, in Manhattan, there's no MLS. So Manhattan operates with no MLS. And if you watch, because a lot of those shows are based there, but if you watch, you'll hear of brands that don't really exist anywhere else. So as an example, Douglas Elliman, Corcoran, Barbara Corcoran, who's now gone on to do and Shark Tank. And the way the offices in New York work are very different than how they work other places. Because again, you're dealing with very high-end real estate, a super high expectation of service, and then you don't have an MLS. So the agents have to be really good salespeople, and they don't have time to do all the other non-sales. So those brokerages are set up more how a sales organization would be set up. So the splits there are quite high. because again, real estate's expensive there and everything else. But you get a lot of service from your brokerage. So
because without the MLS, they don't have a unified system where everything gets listed.
Yeah, so you need to go. So when you watch like those, I think that $1 million listing was the first one, and you see these agent open houses where they're going to these big parties, and it looks like everything's but a lot of that is actually. That's like a big part of the job is like you as an agent have to have a network of agents. You need to know what's for sale. You have to be constantly previewing properties. You need to know what's coming on and everything else. They can still list their properties on like websites and everything else. They have a Street Easy is the website. It's a cool app too. Zillow's bought them now. But like they've always had ways of kind of showcasing properties for sale in New York, but the agents work way harder than they probably do anywhere else.
I have a listing. I know that Duncan specializes in these type of clients. Like, hey, Duncan, I have this new listing. It's more like that.
Exactly. It's real like old school kind of sales stuff. Like you build networks, you work your networks, and then you also have to like manage your clients and everything else. So you don't have time for paperwork. You don't have anything else. So when we built this office, we said, okay, our office is going to house the support. So we have amazing admin support. We have all in-house marketing, and then we have like licensed assistant support. So again, if an agent's double booked, or they need help with an open house, or they need someone to go to a revisit, like we have that support. So they don't have to figure that out themselves. You need help writing an offer because you're in the car racing to do something else. We have that support here. We also have, concept around sales and marketing is a real interesting one in real estate because a lot of times you'll hear from agents like, oh, I used to do marketing and everything else. But to do the job really well, you need time. And it's hard, and to do marketing really well, you need time. So to try and do both effectively results in what happens to our industry where you have someone up at 2 a.m. on Canva posting on Instagram because that's the only time they have available during the day. And then you get back to these mega teams. What do the mega teams have? The mega teams have really good admin support, they have really good in-house marketing, they have kind of that licensed assistant arm. So we don't feel we're doing anything different than what they're doing. We just personally don't believe in the team leader, like, the mythical team leader type figure. Like
basically naming the company your name and everybody's under you kind of thing.
Correct. And we feel like with, and like I said, I coached hockey for years, so I spent a lot of time with like that younger age group. And Andrew and I are the last year of grade 13 in Ontario before they got rid of it. And if you look at the younger agents that are coming up, and you're obviously younger than I am, so you're in this category, like how you were educated and how everyone my age and older was educated was very different. So you were educated in a rubric, team-focused education system, where prior to that it had been basically lone wolf. You do everything by yourself, very little work in groups, very little work in teams. You eat what you kill and everything else. And that really was, and still is to a lot of point, the real estate industry, because the real estate industry is an older industry, because again, it's hard to start at 20 and become successful because you don't know anyone that can afford a house, especially out this way. Whereas the typical person used to start around the age of 40. And I think when I started in real estate 10 plus years ago, the average agent in Oakville was a 61-year-old woman. That was the average agent. So that is where our industry is typically a laggard in a lot of ways, but it's because the type of people that do it, again, it's just like, it's a hard job because it's 100% commission and everything else. You need to have a database, you need to be a self-starter, all those sort of things. We've, again, are seeing this shift where you now have younger people that, a guy like yourself, like you understand personal branding. Like even if you don't realize you do, like I know you do because you're in marketing, but like every young person, they understand how to manage themselves far different than their grandparents. Their grandparents didn't have to think of any of this stuff, but you taught a young person today, like social media, like all of that stuff, like they're so aware of it, where a couple generations, even one generation before, they weren't even thinking of this kind of stuff. So for that type of a generational shift, to think that that person is going to want to work underneath someone else's brand and be content for a long term, it's not going to happen. What do you see? You see a lot of younger agents, they join a team to get a little bit of experience, and then the second they get good, what do? They leave. They're gone, they're out the door. So we were like, what's a model where someone could come in, they could learn, and they could develop their own brand, and then they get really good and they stay. Or for someone who's at the back end of their career, where they know how to do the job really well, but they just hate paperwork and they hate marketing and everything else. What are those guys? So that's really what we focused on, is like, we know what already works because it's out there, it's proof. All the mega teams have all the market share, they're the best, like they have the dominance and everything else. So we're like, okay, let's just figure out what they're doing and try and figure out a way to do it as good or better. And then secondly, what we wanted to look at was, that piece around, it's the agent's business, but the brokerage is saying, which every brokerage says, oh, it's your own business, and then we give you no support and you have to figure it out all by yourself, is also the myth of, if you're really good at sales, it automatically means you're an amazing entrepreneur. That might be the case, but it might not. But there's also people out there that are just really good at selling and love doing it and are excellent at it and could make a lot of money every year, but it's not that they couldn't do it, they have zero interest in hiring, managing, firing someone, building out infrastructure. They're just like, this is not something that they're excited about doing, but they're really good at selling. And that type of agent has like nowhere to exist. Right. So what we've focused on here is like that type of agent. That's who we're going after. And if you look at any brokerage, they're broken into 3 categories. You have your mega teams. At the bottom, you've got your new agents, your part-time agents, your unethical agents, and those agents eat up all, those guys and the guys at the top eat up all the resources of the broker managers, the training, everything. And then you've got that group that sits in the middle. That's like your, 100 to 150,000 to about $700,000 a year. They show up every year. They make the sales. They represent the brand in a fantastic way. They come to the Christmas party. Maybe they come to a couple office meetings throughout the year, and you never hear from them otherwise, unless they're in a real jam. Then they'll reach out to the broker of record. They'll have a couple questions, and they're like but they have no services for them. And that's where we felt like, hey, there's an opportunity to kind of go back to build something that has had a proven history of consistently working, but just shape it in a different way, and then allow for the growth of where we think the industry is going, which is going to be more of a collaborative, team-based, setting, but not the teams of today where everything funnels to the people at the top, allowing people to work in a team environment, but also maintain their own business and their own branding and not feel tied to a team leader that they either, if they have to completely rebuild their business, if they chose to leave.
Right. So who, in this new way that you're explaining, this new generation, who gets the listings? How do you get listings?
So coming from sales, that's the one thing I believe, that you should not do 100% commission sales if you do not know how to get listings and pick up buyers. Like, that's the only skill set you actually need.
Because you said that the people that have the most power are the people that have the buyers, right? Basically the people have the clients. Where the agents have the most clients. Some markets you want to have listings. I mean, you always want to have listings, but some markets it's better to have really a lot of buyers and vice versa. Right. But it's the skill to be able to get someone to work with you, to do a very good job, to have that person recommend you to their friends and family, for them to want to use you again, and then to be able to do that simultaneously with a whole bunch of people consistently. So let's dive into that agent. What does the agent have to do? Like, does he have to specialize? Can he still or she still be the agent that deals with all over Ontario or all over the GTA? Does it have to be specialized knowledge in certain things? Like, what does that agent look like?
So it's interesting because, as we talked a little bit about the kind of the shift is, you talk about like networks, right? So again, back in the day, it was all local agents, but those agents had really good networks locally. Now you've got this new generation, and social media has made it like, now like I'm connected to people that I went to high school with that I maybe haven't seen since high school, versus like my grandparents came over from England after the war. Like, anyone they went to high school with, they've never even seen or heard from them again, unless they happen to randomly by chance bump into them somewhere, as an adult. Those are two very different things. Now I have like an up-to-date every day of like everyone I've basically come in contact with and what they're doing, what their family's doing, and everything else. So
it becomes about networks, right? Any good salesperson in any industry, in any discipline, is they're really good at building out a network of potential customers. So again, if I sold like truck engines, like I would need to know like who are the guys that build trucks and everything else, and I would build out a big network there. With real estate, it's a little bit easier because, you know, when you're in sales, you know, typically most things are like wants. Pretty much everything you sell is a want. We are fortunate to sell a need, right? There's a very small list of needs. Housing is on that list. So everyone out there has to have somewhere to live. And, you know, for the most part, you're either going to buy it or you're going to rent it. So almost everyone you come in contact with, you know, you get your car fixed, that guy who's fixing your car, he has somewhere to live and he either owns it or he rents it. And, you spit it down the chain. And yes, obviously younger people will live at home, but they're not going to live at home forever. And even if they do, they're still going to take over their parents' house, right? So it becomes this like cyclical question of like maintaining and building networks, and that is very time consuming. So what is not a good use of an agent's time is like basically how the brokerages are set up now, where it's like, you know, you get bogged down in paperwork, you gotta bog down in all the social media and everything else, when it's like, you know, you need time to like invest in spending it with people, sitting down with people, connecting with people, learning what they're looking for, finding out their needs, and, you know, developing a timeline. Okay, this person wants to move out of their parents' house in the next couple of years. Great. Okay, listen. But you're never going to find that out, you know, if you're busy, if you spend most of your day trying to perfect your website to make it really good. Mm-hmm. Or I've come up with this like really cool Instagram design and I'm going to put this out here and I'm figuring out a way to post it at the right time. Right. Okay, great. Well, now you had, especially some of these younger agents, you might get like 100 likes. Are you following up with any one of those 100 people? Right? And I think that's where people think I can just put this content out, and you mentioned it before we got going. Like, that's the problem. It's like, this is a sales job. You're not a marketer, you're a salesperson. So marketing will put something out there, and then you need to individually follow up.
Get your attention, but you need to make the connection too.
Yeah, because it could be the greatest post ever, it can be the greatest video ever, but if you don't interact with anyone after the fact, you might have not even posted the video. Mm-hmm. Like, who is it for? Right? Like, and again, when it comes to people's like housing, it's a really personal thing. So they're not just going to be like, oh, this random person I don't know, I like a couple of their videos. You know, is that person just going to call you out of the blue and be like, hey, come and help me buy a house, come and sell my house? Like, maybe, but what are the percentages on that? And if you think about the percentages and then you think about how many people you have to get in front of, all of a sudden now you're looking at like national advertising style numbers. You're like, all of a sudden you're like Pepsi or Coke, and you're like, I need to get millions of impressions every day to sell a house. And again, there are real estate agents that offer that. I mentioned Sam McDaddy earlier. Sam McDaddy is an amazing marketer. He does a lot of advertising. But if you're a brand new agent, you know, who knows what, I mean, Sam, I've heard Sam spends like north of $1 million just on print, forgetting billboards and social media and everything else. If you're a brand new agent and you have no money, you don't have time to do that. So you're basically just building off of like your organic network. Mm-hmm. So you need time during the day, and so the typical realtor is the same thing it's always been. They need time to spend with clients, and all the other noise needs to be taken care of them so that they can invest time in their network. And if they don't have a network, then they have to build one the old-fashioned way. They can door knock, they can do open houses, they can join clubs, they can, you know, if they've moved to a new community, they can find like-minded people that have similar interests, and they can build out networks that way.
Fantastic, Duncan. I barely did any talking, but I'm happy I did.
Okay, perfect.
So thank you for being on, and thank you for taking
definitely, pleasure.